Okay. Our speaker is Gerry Zeidenberg. He's a retired pharmacist who became a historian later in life, earning a master's degree in modern Jewish history. He's lectured for over 20 years on modern Jewish history, speaking in newest synagogues, including the Shir Shemayim, Beth Shalom here in Toronto, and for organizations in synagogues and organizations in Canada, the United States, and Israel. His special interest is inspirational stories of Jews who've made a difference in the 20th century. He's written a number of books, including 13 Heroic Jewish Lives, Inspirational Stories that Changed History, Epic Trials in Jewish History, The Evolution of Modern Jewish History, and Blockade, the story of Jewish immigration to Palestine. Okay, you're on.
Okay. Okay, now we've got everybody in. Welcome, everybody. I've been asked many times to speak about Moe Berg before I put together this lecture. I read 3 books. I think I've seen all 3 movies. I don't know the one, I didn't have time to see the one that you have, so I don't know what was different about that. There's some mysterious layers that envelop his character. Frankly, some people are not quite so sure that we could put up the first slide. Okay, we're not quite sure is all of this true, but I think given the circumstances, was he a baseball player? Was he a scholar or was a spy? Was the spy business all true? I think it really sort of lends halfway. There's too much circumstantial evidence that he was a spy, despite some people have written he wasn't. Great enigma of modern Jewish life. I want to say, let's have the first picture, please. Okay, so he was a baseball player. Now, I'm a big baseball fan. And for those of you who are not so familiar, a catcher is probably the most intelligent person on most baseball teams by virtue of the position. They tell the pitcher what kind of pitches to pitch, a curveball, a slider, a screwball, a fastball, whatever. And they sometimes set the defense. So that fitted him. And he was originally a shortstop. He loved to play baseball, but he was originally a shortstop. And he had a leg injury, and that slowed him down, so he had to convert to a catcher. So we want to know, was he a great baseball player? Was he a great scholar? He was educated at Princeton. He could speak 8 or 9 languages, and he had a photographic memory. The question that really we're not sure of, was he a spy for the OSS? The OSS was the precursor to the CIA, I'll explain that. Did he make meaningful contributions to the American war effort? And we'll go over it. He graduates, and we'll have the next picture, please. Summa cum laude with honors from Princeton, which is one of the top Ivy League schools. He was a baseball writer's dream. He was a great interviewer. He was an intellect of genius capacity. He knew everything. Now we have to remember, in his lifetime, there was no internet, there was no television, radio was just starting. He would read newspapers. He would read maybe a dozen newspapers a day throughout his life. Not only was he a fascinating character, he was a big, strikingly handsome man. And I'd like to try, as I said, to try and dispel some of the mystery. He was born March the 2nd, 1902. He was a 12-pound healthy baby. He was born in a Coldwater tenement at East 121st Street in New York City. He was the second son and an older brother of Bernard and Rose. They were immigrants from the Ukraine, like most people on the east side of New York, the Lower East Side. They came from the Russian Pale of the settlements. There was a Tsar, Alexander II, was assassinated in 1881. One of the conspirators in the assassination was a Jewish woman. And as a result of that and other issues in Tsarist Russia, they started to really persecute the Jews. Up to that time, they were just confined to this Pale of settlement. So there was this tremendous wave of Jewish immigrants, and they were allowed to come to America. 2 or 3 million Jews come to not only America, to Canada, and so far. Okay. Mendel, his grandfather, had a son, Bernard, Moe Berg's father, and his Bernard was very bright, was admitted to a Russian public school, and their grandfather gives them $20. They're smuggled over the border to Romania from the Tsar's empire. And they come to America on one of these immigrant ships. There were many immigrant ships that spent their whole time taking Jews to America. And what interested me, he came on the same ship that my father, who came from Warsaw, came, the Prince William VIII. The oldest son, Sam, is born behind the laundry on Ludlow Street. And Bernard, his father, wanted to be a doctor, but there were Jewish quotas and financing. So Bernard Berg, the father, goes to the Columbia School of Pharmacy and becomes a pharmacist. He opens 2 drugstores, and the second and most successful was on Warren Street in Newark, New Jersey, where he worked for 32 years. By 3 years of age, Moe Berg was terrific. He could run, he could throw, he could catch, and he could catch everything. And he loved baseball. He was somewhat like another subject that I've done, Hank Greenberg. He cut school, didn't work. He would do anything to play baseball. So here he is at Princeton. His father funds him. They have a letter. November the 3rd, 1918, Moe Berg writes to his father. He needs money. He needs books. He needs newspapers. He needs clothes pressing. He needs $31.90. So father sends him the money. He immediately expresses a fascination with languages. He became, it's fair to say, a linguist. And as I mentioned at the beginning, he had a photographic memory. He also took copious notes. He never wasted time. And he had this knack. You would be talking to him, you'd look away for a second, and he was gone. He had this remarkable trait of disappearing. Phenomenal talent for languages. He would take 6 courses a term. Now, in my second career that you mentioned in the introduction, when I went back to school, when I was thinking about it, I was still working. I took 1 course a semester. I don't think I ever took more than 2 or 3 courses a semester. And when I was retired working towards my degree, most students have trouble with 3 or 4. He took 6. Moe Berg was fluent in written and oral Latin, French, Spanish, Italian, Greek, German, and Sanskrit, which is an obscure language from Southeast Asia. Once he spoke Italian to an Italian waiter, and he said, "What part of Italy am I from?" with my accent, because there are different dialects or accents in Italy. And he says, "Well, you're from the north. You must have come from Milan." He becomes a star baseball player at Princeton. Other students found him shy and withdrawn. It's fair to say he was a little shy. And we'll have the next picture, please. And the reason we have a logo of streetcar, most people don't know, the Brooklyn Dodgers were named after people dodging the streetcars. I don't know how they came up with that. He takes time off, he goes overseas, he visits Paris, and he amazes the people with his French. He returns to the United States, and after a stint in the minor leagues, he plays for the Chicago White Sox. And next picture is him again with Chicago. And as I mentioned, he had a leg injury, so he plays catcher for the remainder of his career. He had a good arm, he could hit a little, but he was really not much more than a 3rd-string catcher. So he was sold from team to team. He went from the White Sox to Cleveland to the Washington Senators, and eventually he ends up with the Boston Red Sox. Washington lost their team for a while, so the Washington Senator name is a name from the past. Casey Stengel, the famous manager of the Yankees and later the New York Mets, said Moe Berg was the strangest man ever to play baseball, but also the most brainiest, the cleverest. While he's playing baseball, he goes to Columbia University part-time. He gets a law degree. He goes to Japan twice in the 30s on baseball tours. So this is one of the circumstantial things. Why would they take the baseball tour? Japan really got into baseball in the 30s. So Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig and famous Hall of Fame players went. Why would they take Moe Berg there? So this adds to the thing that maybe he really was a spy. In 1934, he goes to Tokyo and he goes to the next picture, please. He goes to visit somebody in the hospital and he goes up to the roof. They had just perfected movie cameras, little movie cameras, a Bell and Howell movie camera, and he takes picture of Tokyo, takes all kinds of movies of Tokyo. And people think that this film was used in the famous Doolittle raid on Tokyo after Pearl Harbor. And maybe I'll just take a minute to explain that military attack. After Pearl Harbor, the Americans wanted to do something to get back at the Japanese right away. So they sent bombers on aircraft carriers, and the bombers could not land back on the aircraft carriers. So they dropped bombs on Tokyo. They didn't do a lot of damage like they did in the rest of the war, but the bombers landed in China. But anyways, this was a very famous raid. It was the first attack on Japan by the Americans. He spends the last 5 years of his major league career playing with the Boston Red Sox. And why they keep him on the team is a mystery. His baseball days are over. He becomes a Boston Red Sox coach for the years 1940 and 1941. It's odd that he was kept as a baseball player so long. Most teams in baseball don't even have 3 catchers. He was very smart. He contributed significantly to the team, but the prevailing view, I think we have to take that, as I'm saying, there's some concern. Was he really much of a spy? His cover was as a baseball player, but he also loved baseball. He was somebody when he was playing baseball. In the 30s, he visits Berlin and he soaks up the rest of Europe and he's convinced there's going to be another war. I think we could term him as an internationalist. He did not believe that America should isolate herself. And the next picture, please. And this is Pearl Harbor. And the Americans want to revenge that. And the next picture, please. Doing a great job. Here are 3 famous anti-Semites from the 30s. Father Coughlin, the priest, he was a Catholic priest. He had a 2 or 3 times weekly radio program. He spent his whole time talking about the Jews and the monopoly and the horrible thing they were doing to America. Then we have John F. Kennedy's father, Joseph, who under his skin, he was definitely anti-Semitic, but he wasn't open about it. And then we have the famous American flyer, Charles Lindbergh. I hope some of you watched The Plot Against America based on Philip Roth's book. It was on Crave, I think. It was really good. It really portrayed the anti-Semitism of the 30s in America. He goes to Paris. He gets educated at the Sorbonne. He refines his perfect French. The one thing that would make Moe Berg angry was disturbing his newspapers. He would read anywhere from 8 to 10 newspapers a day. No one was allowed to touch a newspaper he was reading. That was considered a live newspaper. Only when he was completely finished was the newspaper then dead and somebody else could touch it. He's in Paris and he reads 8 to 10 newspapers a day in French. When he was in Berlin, he read the German newspapers in German. What was he practicing for? During these trips, he makes contact with foreign nationals who became his lifelong friends, including many Germans and Japanese. 1938, he's in the twilight of his baseball career. He discards his privacy. He's opened his intellectual life. He agrees to perform on a very popular radio program called Information Please. And we'll have the next picture, please. And you may remember from the early television, What's My Line with Dorothy Kilgallen, and one of the participants was Clifton Fadiman. He was the moderator. 10,000 people called the NBC radio network, and they were astounded by Moe Berg's tremendous knowledge and learned responses. In a special program, a group of professors, they assembled together, and they're going to try and stump Moe Berg. They couldn't do it. No matter what the questions he answered on topics like the wonders of the ancient world, the Colossus of Rhodes, the lighthouse at Alexandria. But when he got back to the baseball field, he was upset because the stands started to heckle him, and his equilibrium, he was a very sensitive person, so he wouldn't appear anymore. Some of the panelists on the show felt that Berg was trying to conceal something. He must be a spy. When he concluded his 18-year baseball career, he reflected his father would never see him play. There's something about Jewish parents of that age. All the money and fame that their child was achieving, baseball wasn't a proper living. And the next picture, please. They felt he should be a doctor, a lawyer, or even a pharmacist. That's all better than being a baseball player. Just for those of you who like baseball, 16 years, 663 games, and a 243 batting average, which really isn't that terrible for a catcher today. It's Friday, September the 1st, 1939. The Nazis invade Poland, and for Berg, the world was invaded. It was 2 years really before the Holocaust starts. I just make a point about Jewish history. We have to understand, although the Germans had Kristallnacht and they were shooting people on the street and people were being brutalized, the actual Holocaust does not start till June the 22nd, 1941, when the Nazis invade Russia. That's when the mass killings, the organized killing starts. May 1940, France falls, and the Wehrmacht stood astride of Europe, unbeatable. In 1939, a Princeton colleague of Berg's, Albert Einstein left Germany in 1932. In December 1932, Albert Einstein was a very wise man because Hitler comes to power January the 30th, 1933. So Albert gets out of Germany a month or so before Hitler comes to power. And we have the next picture. So Albert Einstein sends a secret letter to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Now, Albert Einstein, and this is one of the things that I really want to explain about the atomic bomb. Albert Einstein was a theoretical physicist. He had no idea that the atom could be split. He had all these ideas, and his ideas eventually led to the knowledge, but he had no idea whatsoever. Another Jewish physicist, Szilard, a Hungarian Jew, persuaded Albert Einstein because they had split the atom in a nuclear reactor, the first nuclear reactor, under a football field in Chicago. And Szilard and some other physicists felt this could become a weapon by splitting the atom. So Szilard explains this to Einstein, and Einstein was terribly afraid of the Germans. And actually, 2 letters had to be sent to Roosevelt till Roosevelt was persuaded. And then Roosevelt put in play the Manhattan Project would build the atomic bomb. And I'll come back to that. Even at the end of the baseball career, Berg was always seemed to be disappearing into secret meetings. It's January 5th, 1942, and a young 32-year-old, next picture, please, Nelson Rockefeller, he looks so handsome. He would have made a great president. At any rate, he gives Moe Berg a job, an appointment. He's the special sports ambassador to South America. And with his great gift of languages, he could speak Spanish. He used to explore the worry in Washington about the German ability to penetrate to Latin America. There were a lot of German agents already in Argentina. Bernard Berg, Moe's father, dies January 14, 1942. And because of his father's fame and intellect, there were numerous large obituaries in all the major US papers about Moe Berg's father. Because of his Japanese connections and his ability to speak Spanish, his great linguistic abilities, he makes an extraordinary radio address in Japanese to the people of Japan on shortwave radio. This was after Pearl Harbor. And he says to the Japanese people, overthrow, Japanese government by this time was a military dictatorship. Not all the Japanese wanted to have a war. Well, so the military had taken over. So they have this shortwave broadcast. And the shortwave broadcast is, next picture, please, was arranged by Bill Donovan, who was appointed the OSS. And I explained the OSS was the American Secret Service, the precursor of the CIA. I think everybody understands the CIA works only outside of the United States. The FBI takes over on those kinds of affairs inside the United States. Many Japanese people who knew Moe Berg were profoundly moved and they cried. But the government of Japan banned baseball as a decadent American sport for the rest of the war. Moe Berg goes to South America on a tour. He makes sure to interact with both government and non-government officials, and he carefully examines Nazi activities in the country. Next picture, please. And he goes to the Panama Canal, and he inspects the defenses at the canal. The American government was seriously concerned about the canal. Obviously, it's a very important thing. And they were worried that either the Japanese or the Germans or both could attack the canal. And Berg makes recommendations, it said, about strengthening the defenses of the canal. He initiates sports programs and so forth for the inhabitants and the American forces. And he makes sure the most important thing was that the American forces based in Panama and so forth, at that time the Americans controlled the Panama Canal Zone, they didn't want any issues to develop between the American forces and the local people. And they wanted to discourage any Nazi propaganda. The war is dragging on, and the American intelligence community realized they had nothing. And we'll have a few pictures now. Next picture. This is the logo, if you would, of the German Secret Service, the Abwehr. And the next picture, and this is the Russian NKVD. The Russian secret police have changed their names several times. We had the Ukraina under the Tsars. You had another one under when the communists first took over. Then we had the NKVD. Then in our time of the Cold War, we had the KGB, and now it's the FSB. And the next picture. And similarly, Britain, same setup as the United States. MI5 is the British Secret Service that operates in the country. MI6 is what operates outside the country. Well, they finally decide, in the next picture, please, we have the OSS, which is the American Secret Service, and it was run by Bill Donovan. Everybody sees Berg as an excellent spy material. Bill Donovan was a New York City lawyer, tremendous organizational abilities, and he tells FDR he wants exceptional young men with discipline and daring and linguistic skills, and Moe Berg fits the bill. Berg fills out an application and gives references, the Red Sox owner, the baseball players, Nelson Rockefeller. Berg is taken on by the OSS, and swears an oath of allegiance and secrecy. And he really kept to the secrecy. He would never talk about anything that he did. August the 1st, 1943. The OSS was divided into a civilian and military branch, and Berg was kept in the civilian branch. In this way, he'd able to move more easily among civilian populations. His great gift of languages and his quick mind. His first major assignment was to investigate the conflict in what was then Yugoslavia. It's, of course, now split into several different countries. They were having a terrible problem there. In the next picture, please. Here we have, it's now split. What was Yugoslavia is now Slovenia and Serbia and Bosnia and so forth. So at any rate, they were having a civil war. At the same time as they were having a civil war, they were having a war with the Germans. So there were two partisan groups. I know it's a little complicated. There were the Chechens and the communists. The communists, and there's the next picture, please. Here are the Chechens, and the next picture, please. And they were led by this man. I won't even try and pronounce his name. And the next picture, please. And Tito, here's a name from the past. So what you have are two partisan groups who are each fighting the Nazis, but fighting each other. So the problem was, who do you give aid to? And there was a tremendous effort because they were tying up a lot of German troops with this partisan activity. So they had to drop supplies. So the British and the Americans were dropping supplies. But who should they give the aid to? The Chechens were the royalists. They wanted the royal government. So Donovan had been ordered by Franklin Delano Roosevelt to evaluate the situation. Where should American aid flow? So the story goes that Moe Berg was dropped by parachute into what was then Yugoslavia. He goes to see Mikhailovich, and he goes to see Tito. And the next picture, please. Okay, we'll just hold that for a minute. So as a result, the British dropped their support from Mikhailovich and the Chechens, and Berg comes back with a report they should support Tito. But Tito was a communist, and the Americans made another fatal mistake. They didn't supply Tito. The Chechens lost out. Tito took over, and Yugoslavia became a communist country. But if you remember, in the aftermath of World War II, Yugoslavia was sort of, didn't really owe allegiance to Russia. The idea of, excuse me, the idea of supplying a communist insurgency just didn't fit, and they were wrong. One of the great concerns to the Western world, and Elaine, I'm going to go ahead with the lecture, just I think it's flowing along. Anyways, they were worried, what if the Germans got the atomic bomb? Because the Americans were working on it, and it was terrible. So next picture is this one. This is the Manhattan Project. And the Manhattan Project, nobody knew what the other person was doing on this. And the major amount of work was done in Los Alamos, which is in New Mexico. And the first bomb was tested at Alamogordo, which is in New Mexico. They were processing uranium and doing heavy water at Oak Ridge. Canada even helped with Chalk River. We had our first nuclear reactor at Chalk River, and so forth. So the atomic project in the United States was so secret, not even, in the next picture, please, not even Harry Truman, he didn't know anything about it. And when Franklin Delano Roosevelt dies, April the 12th, 1945, they were well on their way by this point, and some leaders of the military came in to speak to him, and they said to President Truman, we have something very important to tell you. He had no idea. And they said, we have this bomb that we're developing, and one bomb will destroy an entire city completely. And Truman was so upset with this, he had to sit down. He just couldn't believe it. At any rate, the Americans are terribly concerned. What if the Germans, they had good scientists, the Germans. I'll explain about their problem with physicists. Anyways, Moe Berg, the story goes, was sent to Nazi-occupied Norway, and they're going to check on this heavy water plant. You need heavy water. It's sort of an isotope. I don't want to get into the physics, but you need it to moderate nuclear reactors. They sabotaged the heavy water and it was bombed. There was actually a very good movie made. I remember seeing it. It was called The Heroes of Telemark with Kirk Douglas. Anyways, Berg checks out the plant, and the Norwegians and the Allied bombers, they destroy the plant. So Berg is then taken to Naples, Italy. By this time, the Americans were marching their way up the Italian peninsula. He's supposed to investigate Italian nuclear scientists and physicists to see if there were any German connections. Berg had been given crash courses in physics, and he had a general sense of what was happening with bomb production. They had no significant Italian-German links. One of the reasons they were worried about the Italians as well as the Germans, one of the key physicists that helped America split the bomb was an Italian Jew named Enrico Fermi. So they thought maybe there was some Italian-German link. The Nazis, thank goodness, never made it to first base in baseball thing. They never split the atom. And this was because of Hitler's insane paranoid hatred of Jews. Most of the theoretical nuclear physicists were Jewish. And Hitler, when they came to him, what do we spend our time on? We're going to develop rockets, we're going to develop jet planes, or we could maybe try this physics and develop a bomb. And Hitler said, no, it's Jewish, it's physics, the Jewish physicists. Well, so we can thank our lucky stars that the Nazis never got anywhere with this. Albert Einstein, whose letter I had mentioned, he had started the ball rolling. And the next picture, please. This was the person that was in charge of the Manhattan Project. And as I mentioned, very important to understand is that it was split out all over the United States. No one in one part knew what the other part was doing and what the major issue was. And the next picture, please. Here are 5 Jewish physicists. Albert Einstein, as I explained, he never really grasped the fact till the end that he could make a bomb out of this. Eugene Wigner, Leo Szilard, who was the man who persuaded Einstein to write the 2 letters to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Edward Teller, who was really the father of the American hydrogen bomb. It's a fusion weapon rather than fission. And Niels Bohr. There was a phenomenal play a number of years ago where Niels Bohr meets the one Nazi physicist, and the play was called Copenhagen. If it ever comes back, you should see it. It's strictly a dialogue. So the Germans had this one key man, Werner Heisenberg. He was a non-Jew. He was an avowed Nazi. And they're worried. They don't realize the Germans have gone nowhere. The Germans have gotten uranium ore. That's the basic starting block. And as a result of their research, next picture, please. They bombed there's this Werner Heisenberg. He was a top range physicist, but as I said, they just never got there. And the next picture, please. So they thought they might be developing something, so they really carpet bombed this Duesenberg place. It's 1944. The Germans are losing. They're going to lose the war, but there's a year left. So they outfit Moe Berg as a German resident of the area. He speaks German fluently, and he even hones the dialect of the area. And then at the last moment, Leslie Grove, the head of the American Manhattan Project, he cancels Moe Berg's insertion to Germany. It's too risky. If Moe Berg was captured, he knew too much about the American effort. They had to get to Heisenberg. So they sent him to Rome again. They interrogate the nuclear physicist in Rome, Italy. They know nothing about the German nuclear efforts. In the meantime, Berg finds out from an Italian aeronautical engineer the Germans are developing a jet plane. And it's true, the Germans were the first to have a jet plane. They had a Messerschmitt that used jet power, but it was very late in the war. Berg also investigates the German capabilities on gas and bacteriological warfare, and he concluded they had no war capabilities in the area. I should really stop and say, well, they never used gas. Obviously, they used it in the show and killed millions of our people, but they did not use it in the war as it was used in World War I. The war winds down. The Allies are going to win, but it was an obsession for the OSS and Moe Berg. Let's find out what Werner Heisenberg and what about a German atomic bomb. Heisenberg is the director of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Berlin, and ironically, he succeeded Albert Einstein, who'd been the director during World War I. I'll have to tell you because it always bothers me. Heisenberg had been the author of the uncertainty principle of physics, the impossibility of determining the velocity position of an atomic particle simultaneously. That's how complicated it is. I don't understand what I just said, but that's okay. Heisenberg had worked on separation of uranium-235 to uranium-238, and that all would be necessary, but they never got there. Moe Berg can't go to Germany, but they find out that Heisenberg is coming to a scientific conference in Sweden, and Moe Berg gets Switzerland, and Berg gets invited to this conference. Berg goes to the conference with two things: a cyanide capsule in his mouth and a revolver in his pocket. His intent was to assassinate Heisenberg if there were any clear information the Nazis were close to achieving a bomb. He knew enough about physics, and he could understand from Heisenberg's presentation where the Nazis were going. He made his way around the conference. He chatted with the other scientists to see if he can pick up any hints. The fateful day arrives. Moe Berg displays his credential letter to the secretary. The Germans were worried about Heisenberg. They had armed sentries, and Heisenberg was very closely watched. 20 bona fide physicists, they listened intently to Heisenberg talk. It was physics, but it was more philosophical in nature. He disclosed nothing about heavy water, nuclear reactors, or atom bomb research. After the talk, the 20 scientists break into small discussion groups. Berg moves cautiously from one to another. He's trying to pick up hints of anything. And as I mentioned several times, they had missed the boat, the Germans. Moe Berg closes the safety catch in his revolver, closes the holster, puts away the cyanide capsule. There's no assassination of Heisenberg. He wanders around, he talks to the other scientists and so forth. Now, there was another issue that we should mention. By this point in the war, the Germans are obviously going to be defeated. There's friction between the Soviet Union, it was still the Soviet Union before the breakup, and the United States and Britain. There was a Cold War. Both sides wanted the German scientists. The Germans had already developed the jet planes before anybody else. They had advanced submarines and the V-1 and V-2 rockets. Moe Berg worked on inducing the surrendering Nazis to defect to the West. And they got away Italian and German scientists. And if you remember, a man that was very big in the American space program was really, people sort of swept it under the rug. Werner von Braun was a very devoted Nazi. He was taken to the West in a scheme called Paperclip. So it was very important for both the Soviet Union and the West to get these scientists. In all his travels, Berg loved to live the good life. He dressed well, he dressed predominantly in black, he ate well, he drank well. He would choose wines by the year and what chateau they came from. And he was a great raconteur, storytelling his experiences as a baseball player. His trait as a conversationalist never left Berg. He continued in that vein for the rest of his life. Berg continued to be quick-witted. On a journey through a Russian-occupied zone near Vienna in the immediate post-war, he confronted a Russian checkpoint. He helped get through it. By this time, there was a lot of friction between the Soviet Union and the Americans. So he had some stationery from Texaco. Remember the large red star? He holds that up to the Russian checkpoint and they let him through. The war ends. He draws salary from the OSS for 2 more years. They didn't think there was anything worthwhile. So the OSS, which had evolved into the CIA, terminates the contract of Moe Berg. And the next picture, please. The rest of his life, I'm sorry to say, was sort of a downward spiral. And this is why some people question just what did he really do. The famous catcher spy continued to love baseball. He was always a great interview. He told stories to anybody that would listen. As I mentioned, he was the youngest of 3 children. His older brother, Sam, was a neurosurgeon who served in the Pacific Theater. Moe Berg moves in with his brother, Sam. He still reads 6 to 10 newspapers a day. He frequents libraries. He soaked up the free baseball games. Major League Baseball gave him free tickets to any game. October the 10th, 1945, after the war in both theaters was over, the Japanese war was over after the 2 atomic bombs in 1945, Moe Berg was awarded the Medal of Freedom, a very prestigious award. I think he was unhappy, and this sort of twists the whole view of his life. He rejected the award. He became very depressed when the war ended. He had lived a good life, it was no more. He would never recovered from a dismissal from the CIA at OSS. He had one girlfriend, Estella Hunt, who they had in the movie. She married somebody else. He had the privilege of free baseball tickets at any baseball game. He lived an itinerant life. Mostly he sponged off his brother Sam and later the sister. He would go to Princeton baseball and football games, and he once stayed with the most famous professor, Albert Einstein. He was everybody's perpetual guest. People loved to take him to dinner, and he would regale them with stories. 17 years on and off, and his brother Sam got angry and threw him out, and he goes to live with his older sister, Ethel. In 1970, Moe Berg passes away after a fall at his sister Ethel's house. His last words were, "Did the Mets win today?" It's a sad end to an interesting story. Who and what exactly was Moe Berg? What exactly did he do? He's the only person who served in the OSS CIA that has their baseball card in the CIA museum, and that was Moe Berg. Somebody asked Moe Berg, did he ever play baseball with Babe Ruth? And Moe Berg said, that was the least important thing that I ever did. And that's the story of Moe Berg, and there's the last picture. Okay, so we could take down the share screen. I'd be happy to try and explain or answer any questions at all. Usually we work well if people raise their hands, then we know you want to ask a question.
Okay, I just wanted to say before we start, something from the movie that you might find interesting. They had a lot of interviews with his brother Sam and people who were with him when he played baseball, and of course that couldn't have been recent. So the answer is 30 years ago, there are two filmmakers, Jerry Feldman and Neil Goldstein, where they had set out to make a movie about Joe Berg, and they had done a lot of interviews. So the director of this film, Aviva Kempner, called them and asked what happened to those interviews. So 18 of those interviews in the film came from those who played with Moe Berg, spied with Moe Berg and his brother Sam. And there was also information from the movie from his cousin Irwin, who was the executor of Moe Brothers Sam Estate. And as we heard, Moe Berg did live with his brother Sam for a while. And so Irwin, Moe's cousin, had a lot of the documents from Moe Berg. Also, some of the government documents from when he was a spy became declassified, and that was available for including the movie, and that included what his missions were and who he was involved with.
So I'm sorry, I didn't see that movie. I still have the link. I'll watch it. But so that kind of confirms that most of what I told was true.
Definitely.
Okay, good. That's good. A lot of speculation. And part of it, I think, was his character, and he was upset when he got fired, and he was easily depressed and so forth. So, anybody with any questions?
Any questions? I have a question.
Absolutely.
So there was a quote in the movie that I think it's a famous quote. He knew 10 languages, but he couldn't hit in any of them. I don't know if that was from Babe Ruth. So you said he had a 245 hitting average. That doesn't sound too bad to me. What was he like?
243. Yeah.
What?
Now, for a catcher today, baseball is very different from that time. For a catcher today, 243 is not bad. I don't think Jansen, the Blue Jay catcher, hit 200 last year, or maybe just above it. So it actually wasn't bad, but he really was, he was an adequate baseball player. He wasn't a star.
But he was good as a catcher because of his.
Yes, he was very smart. He would know what pitches and just some baseball talk. Another thing that catchers do, they do something called framing the pitch. So what is this? This is when they catch the ball, they try and catch the ball so it looks like a strike. If you follow, they sort of, it's called framing the pitch. And he was very good at that. Any questions about the atomic bomb or the physics?
It said in the movie that Ian Fleming, who did the 007 movies, recruited him. Do you know anything about that?
No, I'm sorry. Let's hear that one again.
Ian Fleming recruited him to the OSS, is it said in the movie?
Oh, there's so much speculation. Ian Fleming was British, and they're saying that he recruited Moe Berg for the OSS. It could be. I don't know. I'll have to watch your movie. I thought I had seen all three movies, but I guess I missed it.
Well, this one came out in 2019. It's fairly recent.
Okay.
Okay, another question. Um, when Moe Berg had that lecture about Heisenberg and was trying to
In
decide
Switzerland,
whether
right.
to, pardon me, what's the name?
No, it was in Switzerland. I hope I
In
made that.
Switzerland, right. What was it that he knew that they couldn't make the atomic bomb? Was there a certain fact that he was looking for?
The main fact was that this Italian physicist in Chicago, I think just before the war, had split the atom. And that's why it's called a fission, breaking apart the atom. And even Einstein didn't know from his physics that's what. So he was looking for hints that the Germans had split the atom. If they had split the atom, they could be on the road to the bomb. They had never split the atom. I'm not a physicist, so I'm making it sort of very general, but that's the big thing. He was looking for some hint that they had gone to a certain point, and they had never gone to that point.
Any other questions?
I always say going once, going twice, going three times. Any other questions?
Yes,
You enjoyed?
can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so what could there be any declassified records at the OSS that would shed light on any of his workings during the war?
There probably is. By this time, they would be declassified. I think most of the stuff from the Second World War has been now declassified. There would be, I don't know why. I think the first book I read, I'm sorry, I've forgotten. It's a while since I made this lecture, but I think the first book was kind of negative, and the other two books I read were not so negative. So I guess, the circumstances, whether he went to Yugoslavia or not, but like the fact that he was a third string catcher and they took him with this all-star team to Japan in the 30s doesn't really make a lot of sense unless he was there for a purpose. So I'm sure there's most of the story is true. Whether it's all true, we don't know.
Yeah,
But he's an interesting person.
What they said in the movie about him going to Japan was they had a very popular catcher who was going at the last minute. He couldn't come, and they asked Moe Berg. So maybe it was planned. Maybe they asked that catcher not to come to have a space for Moe Berg.
I got a feeling he was in Japan for a purpose. That makes sense.
Because all the other players were, like Babe Ruth and
they were all stars, and he certainly wasn't an all-star. Well, it's very interesting, just to sum up the nuclear events, how much I didn't mention really in a way the father, Oppenheimer. For those of you who know a little bit about this, Oppenheimer was the man that really made the Manhattan Project work, and he was another Jew. And just to tell you, when they were deciding on targets, they were going to drop the bomb on Japan. And there's a beautiful city in Japan called Kyoto. I happened to have been there, and they were deciding where they would drop it. And Oppenheimer pleaded not to drop it on Kyoto. And so that's how it ended up being dropped in Hiroshima. Maybe if you have me back, we'll do the Rosenberg trial, which will fit with this. I very much enjoyed talking to your group. And
thank you very much. There's also a recent movie on the Rosenberg trial that his daughter did. So maybe we could work that in.
Yeah.
It would be great to have you back. I think it would be great to have you back.
Okay. All right. I'll be happy.
Such interesting. And you have to watch that movie. It's what you said today was mimicked a lot what was in that movie. It was amazing.
I kept the link. All right.
Thank you.
I wish in these times we're going to get out of it, but I wish you all well. and be safe. And thank you very much for having me, and I wish you all the best. Be well. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Be
Thank
well.
Okay.
I'm just